The question is, are you confident Europe can succeed in muscling up to its competitiveness and energy resilience while speeding up its net zero transition? I repeat the question again. Are you confident Europe can succeed in muscling up its competitiveness and energy resilience while speeding up its net zero transition? So I guess so, 50%. Oh, definitely 38%. Okay, that's going to change a little bit. We're going to ask you at the end of the discussion this question again, and then we can compare whether you have been convinced by what has been said here in our discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me here on stage. And also, by the way, since we want to enable live interactions with the panelists, you're more than welcome to ask, also during our discussion, all kinds of questions through the app. And speaking of interaction, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of our conversation, there will also be an interaction between the panelists and two members of our young listeners. It will be Roland Zündorf, who you met already on stage, and Selma Cafferty, so the two German youth delegates at the United Nations Summit of the Future. They will join us later here on stage and ask the questions they think I haven't been addressed, I have not addressed to you. So in the discussions so far, we have talked a lot about the growing need for cooperation and collaboration. You all, everybody of you, has got a great deal of experience when it comes to reconciling different interests. Kirsten, what new kind of partnerships, and I will then pass on these questions to you, Alessandra, and Roland as well, what new kind of partnerships are needed, in your opinion, on a regional, on a national, and of course, a global level to bridge the gap between climate commitments on the one hand and the current reality, or realities on the other hand? Kirsten.
I have a long list in response to
You have a long
this.
list, okay. Why don't you start with your
well,
long
in
list?
the sense that I think partnerships, the principle of how we move past our idea that competitiveness and competition is the healthiest way of getting progress to happen. Echo?
There is an echo, but I just look at the numbers. Yeah?
And really deeply understand the game-changing difference of deep radical collaboration partnership is one of the key areas where I think Europe has the greatest opportunities and certainly some really significant needs. But a few things that would come to mind immediately. In the European context at the moment, there are a suite of initiatives that, from my perspective, looking globally, are amongst the boldest and most ambitious climate transformation initiatives in the world.
Yeah.
And they are not, yes, there's a suite of legislation, there's a Fit for 55, but what the last Commission did by establishing missions, taking a leaf out of the book of JFK and establishing not moonshots but earthshots, 5 of them. One of them focused on cities, one of them focused on regions and climate resilience, one focused on soils, one on oceans, and one on cancer. I can speak very deeply about the cities and the adaptation mission because Climate-KIC leads the consortium that is implementing the cities mission and is deeply involved in 2 of the others. And the cities mission is a commitment of 100 cities in Europe, 12 on the fringes of Europe, to completely decarbonize in the next 6 years, by 2030.
So repeat that, because this is, for me, it's not, I didn't know that. 100 cities?
112,
12%
cities of Europe's population.
By signature.
Committed with a contract called the Climate City Contract to decarbonize by 2030.
This is massive.
It's absolutely huge. In terms of emissions avoided, it's 0.7 gigatons of emissions avoided by 2030 on scope 1 and 2 alone, and you can't decarbonize a city if you're only doing scope 1 and 2 anyway. It's energy systems, the built environment, the entire transport sector, and it is based on extensive climate action plans, understanding emission baselines, pulling that up into what does that take, investment plans with a sense of what is needed, about a 650 billion capital gap, 80% of which will need to come from private sector, but return expectations in the region of 30 to 32%, and a governance innovation framework to enable effective multi-level governance. Now, when we come then to the question of partnerships, this is not possible without a really significant, systematic, Marshall Plan-like partnership between cities and industry.
Before you continue elaborating on that, let me just ask the audience, who of you did know that, what Kirsten just said? Who of you knows that 112 cities within the next 3 years, right?
Six
years have to take action. Who knows that? Raise your hand. So it's not even 10 people. So in case there are like 150, 200 people in the room, almost nobody knows that. Kirsten, why?
There's a long answer to that. So
give us the honest answer.
The honest answer probably is that we, and this is a chronic problem for almost all aspects of climate action, we are doing everything in fragments and silos. So the cities are talking with the cities, the Treasury departments and the finance departments and the Ministry of Economics are not necessarily at that same table. This is an example of Europe reaching beyond its own subsidiarity principle to reach directly towards cities. So there's also a question of bringing member states and nation states in. I think many, many answers to really seeing this as one of the single greatest chances for Europe to implement an industrial plan.
Okay.
Because if you add up the amount of green cement, green steel, green glass, green logistics that is needed for these cities, you have an industrial plan for Europe. And the idea is that this 112 acts as a very, very accelerated learning environment to enable hundreds of thousands of others to follow. So partnership there, industry and cities.
Okay.
On lead markets, constructing the lead markets of the future.
Alessandra, would you like to comment on that, especially on the notion of the Marshall Plan that is obviously needed?
I think the area where the public-to-private partnership should really accelerate is around the hard-to-abate industries, which is where a lot of the emissions today sits. I think Europe has made a gigantic effort and set the bar very high in terms of ambition, but I think there needs to be more pragmatic approach in starting to direct the public funds available to things that are closer to be in the money, because the risk we all face is that all of these funds are going to be struggled to be used, which is what we as a developer of green energy projects that are for the industry are facing. So the gap between what is competitive and affordable and where today the technology allows the price to be is still not enough. And so giving mandates, which is what Europe is now getting to, is the right thing. So taking the by sector, giving mandates and therefore allowing the demand to have the support to do the move that they need to. Because one of the things that sometimes we underestimate is the broader implication on the industrial system on the end of the users. It's also true in cities. If you decarbonize a city, sometimes you completely need to redesign the way cities get their heating, their power. You need to replace the gas. And this is massive, and there are industries where the cost of doing this are so high on the industrial side that industrial players are struggling to do that step, pending certainty that if they do, there is going to be the green energy at the end. So this is one side. I think the other side where there needs to be a different approach on public-to-private partnership is, and you were asking about state level, continent level, is between Europe and its neighboring continents, particularly Africa. Because if we talk about energy, we cannot, I think, honestly believe we can decarbonize in an efficient and sustainable manner without a different relationship and partnership with our African friends, leaving value to them and not just bringing what we need on our side. And the third piece of the public-to-private partnership that I don't think has been made enough is around skill set and people. Transition needs thousands of specified people with a skill set that to date have not yet been developed. There are not enough engineers, there are not enough people that can cope with the mission that we are setting for ourselves. And this is an area where I think we really need to do more in public-to-private partnership, because I don't think there's been enough understanding of the broader requirements. I mean, any of my projects will require thousands of people during the construction phase. And today, those don't exist in Africa, but also in Europe or in the US, by the way.
Let's Roland, thank you very much. Let's Roland bring it to the discussion. What's your opinion about that? And do you know of any concrete, precise examples of successful partnerships, not in an abstract manner, but in a very concrete manner.
No, of course, the International Renewable Energy Agency, the agency I work for, is a platform from the 170 governments that are members of IRENA, and the energy transition globally is quite complex, and this complexity requires coordination, thus collaboration. And a big part of the purpose of the International Renewable Energy Agency is to provide a platform for collaboration, no? And let's say that means collaboration with the private sector, but in reality, if you would like to create the energy transition in a city or in a local environment, you need to involve all stakeholders, and not at the very end of a process when you implement the project. Already in the energy planning process, you need to involve all stakeholders, academia, the public, the citizens, the local administration, the national government, the regional government, and you need to also coordinate with your region. So this
Roland,
is in reality what we do. But
let me just interrupt you, sorry. But we just heard from Kirsten that exactly that, what you're describing, is not happening. There are still these silos, and all those stakeholders are not talking to each other. So what has to change in order to change that? Because from what you just said, it's not going to happen, at least not in the amount it's needed.
It needs to be actively orchestrated.
Sorry?
It needs to be actively orchestrated, and the active orchestration of that kind of silo busting isn't necessarily incentivized or funded.
It's not incentivized, that's the... Sorry.
I think that's part of the things we are doing, creating awareness about this, no? Making policymakers, but also the private sector aware that they have to involve stakeholders in getting successful projects. Otherwise, these projects will create resistance and they will fail. Let's say projects do not fail because of the technology. Usually they do not fail because of the financing and the economics. They fail because there is a lot of social resistance, specifically in developed countries. But in terms of collaboration, I would also make another point, which is very important. So if you look at the energy transition globally, and if you look into the investments that go into the energy transition, then 98% of the investments are happening in G7 countries and maybe a handful of G5 countries like China, India, Brazil, South Africa, just to name a few. But only 2%, or between 1.5% and 2% of the investments go into the African continent, for instance. And I think it's very important, and this is a thing we try to do at IRENA, to gain and bring countries together to work collaboratively on the energy transition, also in countries that have more difficulty to get access to finance and to get the investments into the energy transition in their countries. And there have been quite some good achievements in the discussion around the tripling of renewable energies, which we agreed at the G20 in Goa under the presidency of India, which went into the UAE consensus. But it's now very clear the G20 countries, specifically the developed countries, have to support the African continent and other developing countries to achieve this tripling of renewable energies. And that comes with a lot of steps that have to be taken.
I'd love to bring in the, into the discussion the African perspective, actually. And is there anybody who wants to comment on that in the audience? Because I do think we have some experts in the audience. Maybe just a statement, because I do think it's important when we talk about that matter to hear to everybody, especially to those you have just mentioned. So can I get, I know that this wasn't planned, but I don't care. Do we have a hand micro? Thank you very much. You raised your hand, and I'm thankful that you give us your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, IRENA is a partner of. IRENA is a partner with the African Union in having a master plan for energy in Africa, so a continental master plan. But I raised my hand because I want everybody to hear the number that was cited again. There isn't shortage of money in the market, climate money. there isn't any shortage. Only 2% of this climate finance goes to Africa. Keep this in mind. And know that, I mean, I'm sure that you're going to touch upon, also the renewable capacity and the installations, last year, the majority did not happen in developing countries. This is where they are most needed. So keep this in mind, and please check your phones after I finish, and just type Africa profitable region and see who is the most profitable region when it comes to investment in infrastructure energy. And then let me know who is it. If it's not Africa, then please alert me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So you spoke about, sorry, you want to?
I just want to make a connection because I particularly enjoyed the previous panel. Nicola, thank you very much. But I was also thinking about, Alessandra and I had a brief conversation just before we came on here. One of the things that Nicola mentioned previously and that you were referring to is what I think actually the Italian government has done very well in framing up the notion of symbiotic partnership. So that what is happening in between Europe and Africa is about localized production in both places and the infrastructures for those to endure. I think that that is a really important piece to come out because that requires skills and a mindset shift that we have not had until very recently.
And if I can just build, we are working developing a project that will have renewable generation in Tunisia and Algeria being in part exported to Europe through Italy, but in part left in country. So the discussion we've been having with the Tunisian and the Algerian government is we will commit to leave 15 to 20% of the generation for local consumption and export the remaining part. So this is a way to have private investment coming and off-takers from Europe in a way, de-risking the African cost of capital on one side, but at the same time giving an acceleration to the development of the renewable in some of these countries. And of course there is a proximity that we are leveraging, and I think a project like this can be done and can be done in a win-win situation where we try also to have local content not only in terms of living generation, but also in terms of workforce and specific industrialization.
Thank you. Before we come, there are some questions coming in through Slido from the audience, and I'll get to that. Let's shift the focus for a second to the situation in Europe. Alessandra, where in the supply chain could Europe strengthen, in your opinion, a competitive advantage, so to speak, to become industrial leader in the net zero transition? And then Roland and Kirsten.
Thank you. I think Europe has a great opportunity, but also some sense of urgency that needs to be applied, because in the field where we operate, being it substation, cables, there is a lot of historical wind turbine manufacturing. There is also a lot of historical leadership by European players. But I think there's not been enough done by the industry in general in terms of scaling up and optimizing the production capacity, bringing down cost. And this is due to the history. I mean, cable manufacturers have been going up in the good and bad times, and so they haven't been really going long in the production capacity, which means for my project, I now need to wait until 28 or 29 to get the availability of cables because there is not enough manufacturing capabilities. So I think that working on the umbrella of the Industrial Act that the Commission promoted, the prior Commission promoted, and try to really, I'm not saying force, but gently push.
Gently pushed, yeah.
Some of these players to go longer production capacity, also not just adding small pieces to existing factors, but thinking about 2.0 manufacturing capabilities to reduce the cost, because one of the issues we have is that the transition needs to be affordable. Otherwise, we will all have issues as citizens, no? of this.
Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
So I think cable, substation, wind turbine are places where there can be a lot of effort. When we move into hydrogen, one of the ideas we've tried to promote in the past, but with very limited successes, in a way, we have a great example in Europe, which is Airbus. Airbus is the partnership by a number of players on different things to create a global leader. And in the electrolyzer space, that was what we tried to advocate for 2 years ago. And of course, each player has gone with his own development, and it's the market, no, that does these choices in a way. But I think there can be more. One other example that I think can be applied to help this transition is in the US, when the defense is promoting big purchase program, they are creating a sort of backstop guarantee, I call it, so that players that are bidding for the tenders are in a way protected and they have optimized their value chain. And the same, I think, can be applied in the transition space.
Roland.
Yeah, I think the strength of the Europeans is their innovation potential across all European countries, the innovation networks, and Europe has been very successful in innovation in clean tech and energy transition technologies. I think also solar PV kind of has been developed to its matureness in Europe, but now because of the differences in labor costs per piece, this is a monopoly of the Chinese, and 95–96% of solar panels are produced in China. And there we have to see, let's say, Europe is a small continent with smart people, with good technology knowledge, but with high labor costs per piece. And that means we need partnerships to, on the one hand, to create our innovative potential, as has been said. The European Union has still a leading position in electrolyzer technology. We are leading in wind energy technology. I think also turbine technologies for hydropower. We have a leading industry, but we need partners and partner countries for the manufacturing and the diversification of the manufacturing of these technologies because of the high labor costs in Europe. And there we have to look to our neighbor regions to see if there is a possibility for partnerships to produce certain of these technologies while investing, while creating partnerships in combining the energy systems of North Africa with Europe, in also creating possibility of manufacturing and using technologies that we have developed and innovate in Europe and bring them to, for instance, North Africa or Central Asia, to manufacture them cheaper there as we can do it, which I think is a key thing to create a stronger diversification of the manufacturing and the global supply chains for the energy transition. Otherwise, this will be only happening in one country.
Thank you, Roland. Kirsten,
I want to answer that question.
Yeah, answer that question, then have another one regarding Airbus as an example.
Okay. No, for me, I think there are two things that we've not said that are absolutely essential. Where Europe can specialize and will need to is dematerialization. We have to completely decouple decarbonization from resources, from resource use, particularly critical raw materials, and demand reduction. Most of what we're discussing is all sitting on the supply side. We need, the global north has a responsibility on multiple directions, but it also has a question of basic survival. We do not have enough materials to achieve the energy transition, the material transitions that we need to achieve across almost all fronts. The math simply doesn't add up. Not only that, but you add it to the geopolitics of where those resources are held. They are 90+ held in places that Europe does not have access to, majority held also under the control of China on both mining and processing. But most importantly, we have IPCC scenarios, all of which assume that the global south stays in poverty. Not one single IPCC scenario assumes that the global south actually develops in the way in which the global north has been able to. And if that changes, which it should, because how are we going to live in a world where people begin to see that effect, then all of those scenarios fall apart. So Europe's #1 competitive opportunity and advantage is to dematerialize the entire economy and specialize in resource efficiencies, reverse reuse, reserve resources, circularity, urban mining, put back into circulation almost every single thing that we have. That would be a sustainable industry.
All that doesn't happen overnight. So what's the time frame?
Well, we don't have to. I mean, if I speak about the cities that need to decarbonize in 6 years, take the Swedish cities alone. Gothenburg has already procured green cement. That's the supply of green cement available in the next 3 to 5 years. Where's it going to come from for the other Swedish cities? That hasn't That problem hasn't been addressed yet. So we are facing massive issues in our assumptions. Every individual actor assumes that they will decarbonize using available technologies, assumptions about where resources come from. Read the International Resource Panel report. If there's one thing it says is we have to change our assumptions about materials and resources. So it's going to have to come much faster. And if you like, this is the biggest single innovation opportunity that Europe has. Our biggest challenge, if I think about our innovation centers, and I'm here speaking as a member of the European Commission has a panel for the economic and social impact of research and innovation policy. We just published a report earlier in the year which is showing that Europe's innovation centers are very well connected, not across Europe, but internationally. So some of our best quantum centers, some of our best AI centers have fantastic partnerships with MIT and with India, but not with each other.
Not integrated.
That opportunity to really maximize our internal market capacity to innovate in materials science, in resources, is one of the biggest fast time pressure moving incentive opportunities we have for the next Commission.
Alessandra, do you agree that this is the single biggest investment opportunities?
I think it is, but I want to go back to what I was saying. A lot of the climate tech and basic existing technologies today are not bringing a lot of jobs because they are almost entirely automated. And I think this is the shift we also need to make in our own mind and focus on the value add pieces when it comes to job creation, and whatever can be automated, because ultimately that will drive down the cost of energy, which is what the industry here needs, because we pay in energy twice as much as the US or China today as a starting point.
Alessandra, there's one question. I think you haven't seen it, but it's coming from the audience. I would like to give voice now to the audience because there's so many questions. They're kind of diverse questions, but let's start with the one that is specifically addressed to you, Alessandra. Given your connection to Pope Francis, how could we unite against, I didn't know that there is a connection to Pope Francis, maybe you can elaborate on that, but how could we unite religious organizations in messages to conserve Earth as God's creation?
Well, I think there is no connection.
What's your connection to Pope Francis?
I simply had the privilege of meeting Pope Francis, and clearly some of his publications have been very much focused on preserving Earth and how we need to also be inclusive with youth when it comes to preserving a growing talent and giving opportunity to everybody. And so this is very much something that, as we have projects in Africa, we try to apply in what we do. I think the spirit of Laudato Si is really, in a way, very high, coming from Pope Francis, but it's very much, in a way, try to create a link between our targets, policy-driven targets, and how we as a Catholic continent can actually drive and on one side and try to create a greater opportunity for our young talent. And this actually allows me to also say something which I believe is important, which goes beyond the Laudato Si. I think that the transition will require a lot of skill set, particularly on the technical side, and I think it's also a great opportunity for women to have a greater role in the transition. There is historically a very low proportion of female that go through scientific topics at school, at university, and there is a structural lack of availability of talent that can actually come into the into jobs, which I think the transition offered to revert.
Second question, you want to take that maybe? Given the chronic lack of tangible decarbonization efforts from the steel sector generally, what's needed to prompt real action?
Well, I was actually thinking about your discussion before about hard to abate industries. For me, one of the critical game-changing factors is to take a systemic approach. You introduced the fact that Climate-KIC as an organization very much focused on systems innovation. So let's take...
And against this antagonism we spoke about.
Absolutely, really fundamental. It means changing the way we're innovating, not just changing our industries, our ways of life. And we haven't yet talked about nature and the other absolutely critical elements we need to bring in. But if you take, for example, take Hybrid in Sweden, one of Europe's leading steel innovations. If we take a systemic perspective on the whole of Europe, You have raw materials in the Arctic Circle, in European context. You have a process of producing sponge state, so solid state iron, and you could ship that within Europe to Poland and Germany and use electric arc furnaces to make it there into steel, thereby creating a new industrial ecosystem within Europe. And the ETS funds, in theory, the modernization fund, could afford that kind of thing. But it requires us to stop thinking in terms of individual ventures, the capitalization of individual ventures in markets. It requires us to take a continental scale perspective and start thinking about how do we build new industrial ecologies. That would speed up growth of a market that's otherwise waiting for the right price point to compete with markets that, as I see from another question there, are still desperately tangled up and hacked by vested interests and subsidies. We have a perverse system of subsidies for fossil fuels that is stopping market development.
Last question from the audience, and then I would like to ask Selma and Rhonda on stage. Roland, what's your opinion on the transfer of technology from Europe to the Global South versus supporting the development of local climate enterprise ventures?
Versus, which question is it? Sorry?
The second one from the bottom. What's your opinion on the transfer of technology from, can you see it?
Local climate enterprises, ventures. No, but I think there is a lot of what we discussed about collaboration. No? So let's say the global energy transition is a global thing, and we have spoken about critical materials, for instance. No? Critical materials, on the one side, need innovation to need less critical materials, to replace critical materials, to use other one, but also circularity plays an important part of it. But then, if we speak about, let's say, environment, social and governance criteria, ESG criteria, and the collaboration between the global north and the global south, then we have to see that there is a certain dependency in collaborating with the global south, because they have rich renewable energy resources, and they have also critical materials which are needed for the energy transition. But it is of course not about exploiting those resources, so we need to create collaborations that are beneficial for both sides. And that goes into something that we discussed, so we have to increase the investments in the global south, coming from the global north. We have to make sure that parts of the value chain, let's say, in the energy transition of renewable energies is created in the global south. And that means, let's say, to give them the possibility to take a role in the manufacturing of the technologies. That means also to create productive uses. And let's say, while you could produce, for instance, green hydrogen in Namibia as an example, you can produce the green hydrogen. You have iron ore there, which you can use the hydrogen to produce steel pellets, which would create jobs. And then you can export these steel pellets, which is much easier than hydrogen. And then you can refine it further in a developed country like Germany or Europe to produce a higher steel level. And that would create investments, that would create jobs in the global south. It would help us to decarbonize the energy systems in the global north. And it would also create investment opportunities and partnerships that are beneficial for both sides. And I think this could be longer lasting. And this is, in my opinion, the opportunity of the future, no? To find entrepreneurial ideas that are beneficial for both partners, the North and the South, and which is also good for the climate.
Thank you, thank you. I want to comment on that.
I would also do two builds. One is I would be very careful to assume that the export is one way. We are seeing climate adaptation resilience solutions being developed in Africa that are significantly more sophisticated than where Europe has even begun to imagine. So this is a two-way codependence. But I would also, we really need to remember we are not living in a world that's an extended present. The way in which heat and climate change effects storms, water changes things. We need to take a long view. Those symbiotic partnerships between continents are going to be needed to sustain massive shifts in where human populations can live, where we get energy generation, where we have arable food, where we have possibilities for biomimicry and biodiversity to be also harnessed for energy transition in so many different ways. So I think we need to be really careful. This is not about exporting to the global south in order to maintain the way in which Europe lives. Forget it. We have to completely transform our sense of how the future is moving.
And if I may...
Alessandra, last word, and then I would like to invite Selma and Ronna on stage.
One second. If we do it right and we leverage resources for creating value for this in countries in the global south, we will drive industrialization there. So that's why I fully agree with what she's saying. We just need to think in a different manner, because we would create value for both, but it will be not just one way. We import the energy. It's going to be, we get it started initially, maybe the quality of the buyers will help this to get started, but then industry will move there.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I know that many questions that has been asked are not answered yet, but I think you're all going to be here over lunch, and I think there's the opportunity that you address your questions directly to our panelists. But now, as being said previously, I would like to ask where they are. Here they are. Please welcome on stage Rhonda and Selma. Hi. Hi. Hello. That's great. That's great. So you've brought along some questions that haven't been asked yet, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, and hello, everyone. So I've been thinking that every single person in this room and elsewhere consumes energy, electricity daily. And I do believe that there lies some power in the consumers. And apart from reducing our usage, I think we can also cast our vote with our energy bills. But right now, there is no financial incentive for choosing green energy contracts in Germany. So I think one great tool could be a reform of the European energy market to make sure that this private choice of buying green energy is actually incentivized, because nudging is a great tool, really. So for instance, in Germany, we only have one energy bidding zone, and that really limits the scope of regional competitiveness for green energies. So my question to you is, do you think that a reform of this European energy market to make sure that this merit order principle that we have now, which really sets the electricity price at the price of gas, even though renewables are cheaper most of the time, can be reformed, because financial incentives really determine how we buy and how we consume energy?
Alessandra.
I can take first shot and then, of course, leave it to my colleagues. I agree that changing the way the price setting works would help. At the same time, Europe still needs to go through an evolution of its energy system so that storage and grids are upgraded to the point that it is true that in certain point of the day renewables are cheaper, but it's also true that you may find yourself in a situation where you are actually under a green contract with spikes on the other side. So it's a very complicated matter. The latest study we've seen suggests that until late in 2030, price will remain set driven by gas, which is kind of shocking if you think about how much Europe is pushing toward decarbonization, to think that by 2038 or so, still in 70–80% of the days, price setting will come from gas. It's a message that we all need to take on board. And I do agree that creating incentives for shifting into the green usage is important, but that goes, I think, on the way of mandates and directing capital and financial resources that exist in a more focused manner. I think just leaving broad targets with no directly focused support to industries and retailers and clients to shift on green will happen at a much slower pace.
I would agree. I think it's not just the energy market. The combination of both, well, the two reports that have just recently been published for Europe, the Letta report and the Draghi report, both of them point to the need to actually get our act together as a single market. And if I'm speaking specifically, if you're working with cities, for example, one of the biggest problems is that we still leave it to the discretion of individual building owners how buildings are set up for energy efficiency and every other form of resources efficiency. We don't let building owners determine where the sewers go or how the street plan is, but we let them determine what buildings actually look like. That is one of the things that we will be bringing to the next Commission to regulate across Europe. It just has to be regulated. And once we get those regulations starting to happen, then you can shift. So it's no longer up to the individual to say, well, I think I might want green, or maybe I don't. It just becomes a kind of necessary. But I think there's something else you're implying, and it goes back to your first question on partnerships. We need to make a partnership systematically between science, technology, engineering, and arts and humanity, because we will not change the demand side of this until we really shift and capture a social imagination around living well with less and working on principles of sufficiency for the collective survival. And there's something that hasn't quite come into our
extremely important point, I think you just raised. Thank you very much for that, Kirsten.
There are three elements in this question, and I find the question very nice. So first, let's say I have a green electricity tariff, and when I was looking in such search machines for my region, actually the top 3 offers I got, one of them was a green electricity price. In reality, there are good prices. The problem is, in Europe, and specifically in Germany, the electricity price is still very high. And I think you are right, the merit order system, which comes from the fossil fuel times and the nuclear times and the gas times, is not anymore an appropriate system to set the price in the European market. That needs to be reformed, but it will take some more time, because of course we are in an energy transition process, and there is still a lobby and a market system that cannot be unfortunately changed over time. But I'm not so much worried about it. What I think is key for the coming years is that the energy transition becomes social. So the energy transition, we at IRENA, we always show the costs of the competitiveness of renewable energies against nuclear, against fossil, and we are looking very good there. But then people come to me and say, I do not have this $0 cent per kilowatt hour tariff. I pay actually $30 per my kilowatt hour. And there is a point where we have, on the one hand, to reform the tariffs, and on the other hand, we have to make sure that the energy transition becomes social, that the people also feel that the renewable energies are the cheapest solution in the energy transition to, let's say, to achieve also value for the customers and all stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Roland. You would like to raise your question?
Yeah. I would like to ask each individually a question, if it's possible. So first to you, Kirsten Dunlop. As a CEO, we often speak as incorporating youth in the political field. But how do you think can we effectively incorporate young people in companies and not only in the political field?
One of the most inspiring people I ever had the opportunity to work with was a man called Leif Edvinsson, who used to run intellectual capital for Skandia. And he did a piece of longitudinal research on the cost of having people of a particular age in decision-making roles in companies. And he used to draw a kind of Boston horizontal and vertical matrix and take risk appetite and age. And when you plot risk appetite and age on this matrix, you get a perfect smile curve. People in their 20s and people in their 60s and 70s are really happy to take risk to change. 20s because they don't think anything can go wrong, 60s and 70s because they've pretty much proved everything they had to prove to somebody. And he said, if you take the cost, economic, political, and social, of the fact that most people in leadership roles are in 35 to 55, their incentive is to not change anything. They've got mortgages to pay, school fees to pay, marriages, they're like this. So he said, what you should do is pay for those people to go on a 10-year sabbatical, do whatever they need to do, and take people in their 20s and their 70s and 60s into job shares and put them in every single leadership position, and then you will get change. Now, he was working. I was working in one of Europe's largest insurers, which also happens to be one of the most conservative companies on the face of the planet. And when I put this proposal to the board, not surprisingly, they didn't immediately seize at it. But he went off to work with the government of Singapore, and it is very interesting. I think we actually do need to think really structurally about how to, I'll use the word hacking, how to actually start working on changing some of our systems that are so deeply embedded in our consciousness and also in our experience, our life stage experience, and start to actually blend in decision rights and decision capabilities and risk appetite. And then I do think we could get somewhere.
Thank you for this answer. Now to you, thank you. I also have a question to you. I made a bit of a research and I saw a picture of you sitting in the middle of, it was in Abu Dhabi, and you were in the middle and there were like, I think 2 or 4 men surrounding you. And my question is, as a woman in a leadership position and also in this polarized field, how do you navigate challenges and how do you like, cope with that? Do you have anything or a tip for also young female leaders?
Thank you for this question. Yeah, because I've been part of my career in the finance space and part in the energy space, and none of the two is very well known for being inclusive and having many women at leadership. But I think the experience that I can bring with the career I've done is that if you want and you have the conviction and the determination, you can. I never found myself in a situation where I felt at a disadvantage and to the point that I got discouraged. I always actually wanted to prove that I always had the right answer for people that maybe are enjoying a specific status or are just surrounded by other colleagues of the other gender. And I don't even now realize, unfortunately, I'm so used to be surrounded by men that I often don't even realize that I'm often the only woman in a panel or in a round table or in a meeting or in a board. And I think that a lot has been made to try and increase this, but the journey is still very long. I think it's really up to each of us to show with everyday example that if you want, and of course you need to sacrifice, but on this I think the society has made a lot of progress. I mean, when I was young in the finance space, there was not a lot of attention on quality of life. Today there is a lot in any large corporate of focus around quality of life and gender balance. And that's why I was making the comment about the STEM lack of young females studying scientific topic, because you can put all the rules, but if you don't have young girls that want to study scientific matters and go to university, you cannot have a 50-50 inbound platform where to start. So I think just be very well convinced of your strength. And women has a very different ways of doing things. We're very resilient, we're very determined, we're typically and usually smart. We're not very confident sometimes in ourselves, and that's I think the piece that if I need to just share one advice, try to be confident, because we have everything we need, and it's just a matter of going through your own journey and finding your way to express yourself. But I think that a lot has happened. And just going back to your prior question, what Kirsten was saying about this curve that I like very much is also due to the fact that large organizations have a lot of legacies, legacy policies, legacy strategies, legacy assets, legacy as employees. And change is just limited by all of this, which is one of the reasons why we started our own company, because we don't want to have any legacy. And I think there needs to be more entrepreneurship, particularly in the transition, because then you have the courage to do things, because you don't have any legacy. You don't have your past investor, your team in that country or another country that want to protect what they've done before. It's just a new way of approaching things, which typically get to be more effective, I think, and I hope.
Alessandra, thank you very much. Selma and Rhonda, thank you very much. Kirsten, thank you very much. Roland, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention and for this lively discussion, and have a great day. Thank you.